Hello again. The end of the month takes me by surprise every single time. Every time I can't believe that it has already been another month. But of course it has. It has been 1 month since I last told you about the books I read, and today I've come here to tell you everything about the 11 books I read in July. But to be quite frank, I'm not going to talk about all of the 11 books in this video, because 5 of them have been in my video where I talk about Cillian Murphy's favorite books. And I also have to say that 3 of the books aren't here. I know that I lent one to my grandma, but I don't know where the other 2 are. But I guess that's what we're dealing with today. The first book I read in July was The Man Who Died Twice, which is part of the Thursday Murder Club series. And I have to say, this book was about as great fun as the first one. I didn't find it quite as great, but that was merely the fault of the plot, in that it was a little more sinister than I personally would have liked. Because in the beginning, Ibrahim, the psychiatrist, gets beat up by a gang of thugs that are in their teenage years, and following that he falls into a bit of a depression because he just learned that going outside was fun and there's a lot you can do even if you're a bit older, and then he got beat up and he suddenly doesn't want to leave his bed anymore. But of course the other members of the Thursday Murder Club, they want him to be in court and they want him to get a sentence. There's no way this would actually work out, because it would be statement against statement, because Ibrahim says one thing and the teenager says another thing. So they have to think of something else. And then suddenly Elizabeth gets a visitor who turns out to be not only her ex-husband but also a fellow colleague from the MI5, because if you didn't know that, Elizabeth used to be an agent. He comes to her and he says that they are trying to kill him. And yeah, that's basically the plot for The Man Who Died Twice. Again, it was a great page-turner. I loved it. The characters were lovable, just like in the first part. So I can only recommend that you read The Man Who Died Twice. And if you haven't read the first one, I would read that first though. The second book is At the Table, and this one kind of surprised me. I hoped that I would like it because I found the title and also the excerpt on the back very intriguing, but I wasn't sure if the book would deliver on that. But I think it did. The plot is that the parents of the Maguire family are splitting up. They are getting a divorce after over 30 years of marriage. And that sends their grown-up children, Nicole and Jamie, into kind of a spiral. They suddenly don't know what they are doing with their own lives. You see, Jamie is engaged and he's supposed to get married to his fiancée quite soon, but he suddenly notices that he is falling in love with another teacher who works at his school, and he even envisions her during sex and everything you could imagine that could happen there. I'm not going to spoil how this plotline ends for you, but I thought it was very realistic, and Jamie's feelings felt like something I think a lot of people feel, especially if they are settling for someone, because they think, well, I've been in this relationship for 10 years, it would be a shame to throw it away now. But sometimes that might be the better option. And on the other hand, we have Nicole, who is notoriously single, notoriously work-obsessed, and also notoriously an alcoholic. She tries to come to terms with her parents splitting up by writing a message to her ex-boyfriend, and they meet up and he tells her that he actually has a girlfriend and they are having a child together. Nicole's world is basically blown to pieces by this, because she was so convinced that she and her ex-boyfriend could make it work again. But yeah, that obviously doesn't happen. And I think, again, I have mentioned this before, but the portrayal of the people is just so realistic. You can really feel that this is something that could technically happen to everyone, if not to most people. It's basically a slice of life book, and everything is themed around food. So it's basically always when the family meets up to eat, or even the siblings just eat on their own, it's all themed around food and the table, and obviously that's also where the title At the Table came from. But I thought that was a really interesting idea, and I found it to really work in many cultures, and also in Western culture. The table is just a place where family gathers around, ideally to not only share a meal but also to share stories. I thought the book took this concept and showed us all the things, all the family dynamics that could go wrong or that could be hurtful. And for me, my favorite thing was Nicole and her mother grew closer as the book progressed, because it is stated in the very beginning that they used to physically fight when Nicole was a teenager, and they never really got along very well. But yeah, in the end, again, I'm not gonna spoil too much, it's all resolved at least a little bit, and I think it was a very beautiful read, and I have never seen it recommended anywhere before, so I wanted to give you the message that you should probably check it out if it sounds interesting to you. The next book I read was Treacle, and it's going to be a little bit hard to explain anything about this book, because in my opinion it was more like a collection of ideas than a real book. Hear me out, I will try to summarize the plot to an extent. There's a little boy named Joe who meets a rag and bone man named Treacle, who gives him an ointment he can use for his eye. And Joe actually puts it on his eye. He's blessed or cursed, whatever you want to call it, with the second sight, which means that when he closes his eye, he can see the world as it really is. If he closes the other eye and sees through the eye which he put the ointment on, he can see a world beyond his own world. And during the course of the story, he also travels through mirrors and is chased by comic book figures. And yeah, if this sounds a little bit convoluted to you, that's because it is. I think this is a book that you don't quite enjoy reading as much as you enjoy interpreting it. If you're familiar with all of the concepts that are spoken about in the book, which consist of three main categories that I found online. The first category is memories the author has from his own childhood. This includes the comic book figures. The second big part of this book would be British and Irish folklore. And the third piece, which was probably the hardest for me, is works from the author. And because I haven't read anything else by the author, obviously that would be very hard for me to understand. So, as I said in the beginning, this book is basically a melting pot of ideas. There's lots of colloquial or even childlike language. There's a lot of rhymes in there, things that seem like they would resemble a nursery rhyme, but there are also themes of death and disease very present in this book. And yeah, honestly, I don't know what else to say about it. I personally think I could think about it a lot more. I actually found an article online for a book club where people were asking questions that you should answer, and I heavily contemplated actually writing down my answers, but for now I haven't found the time yet. If you're interested in reading the book and then answering those questions, I think that's gonna help you understand the book a lot more and also understand what the book could mean to you, because I think that's always the most important part of reading, is what resonates with you, what do you want to keep expanding on, what are the ideas that are stuck in your head. Treacle, I don't really know what to say about it. I think everyone needs to read it for themselves and then decide. The next book is one I actually have here, yay, applause! And it's To Rise Again at a Decent Hour. And I had high hopes for this, but they were not fulfilled at all. You see, this book was supposed to be about a depressed dentist who finds that somebody has taken his identity and is kind of running with it. And the guy who takes his identity has a cult of some sort, but apparently, from the way it was written back here, he seems like a better version of Dr. O'Rourke. But I can't say that was true at all, because first of all, the biggest thing I have to say is that this book, or basically the main guy, had a really weird obsession with Judaism. It is really weird. There are many instances where Jewish people tell him that his obsession is a little bit crazy, and that people that fetishize basically Jewish culture are not any better than people who hate them. In the end, the guy joins this cult that is very anti-Jewish people, even though the cult leader tried to explain that he wasn't, but in my opinion he very obviously was, because he kept telling like, yeah, Holocaust is a terrible thing, but what happened to us was worse. And I'm like, what do you even mean? Please never speak to me again. That's basically what I thought while reading this book. I really didn't enjoy it. And also another thing I have to say is that the main character managed to remain unlikable, even though he had a very sad past and also sometimes present. And that's never been heard of before, because usually if a guy has a sad backstory, I will fall for it. As things stand, this is a trash book for me. I wouldn't recommend anyone to read it. Yeah, I wasted my time with this. Another book I really enjoyed though was Less is Lost, which is the second part of the Less series, as I would call it, by Andrew Sean Greer. If you have read the first one, you know that it's about Les traveling Europe to get some money because he's kind of a failed writer, at least he's not very accomplished, and he just needs money. The second part starts where the other one left off. Les finally has his love, Freddie, in his life. I think it's Freddie, isn't it? Yeah, he has his love, Freddie, in his life, but then again, his old lover, who was a very established poet, dies. He was also a lot older than Les. It gets clear that Les doesn't know what love is besides in a dysfunctional relationship. Les finds out that he owes the owners of the cabin a lot of rent, which he hasn't paid for 10 years. So again, he has to go traveling around the country, this time the United States, and try to earn some money. And obviously a lot of things go wrong. He's pretty much also ashamed, not really of being gay, but basically ashamed of being himself. He's not a big fan of himself, and he's also a very anxious man. And this book is basically the personification of the Murphy's Law, because everything that could go wrong does go wrong, except for love. Somehow that always works out for Les in those books. This was very funny. You can just really tell that Andrew Sean Greer has a lot of fun playing with language. There's a sentence in here where he says that the wind whipped Arthur Less's hair into a stiff meringue, and I thought that was just phenomenal. I really loved it. And I also loved the notion that in this book it is said that Arthur is actually such a brave man because he fears everything. And I really ran with this idea, and it made a lot of sense to me that when you don't feel fear, it's not a brave thing to do. For example, if you're afraid of heights and you still jump out of a plane, didn't you overcome more than the people who are just not scared at all and just do it? That was something that really resonated with me and stuck with me. Maybe because I'm also such an anxious person, and now I can actually feel like I'm very brave. So maybe that's that. If you enjoyed the first part of Les, buy this one, read it, it's great fun. The last book was, I think, my favorite though. I really loved Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. And I just have to say, I've also read Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Sutanto, and I also loved this one. And one thing you just have to say about her books is that they kind of feel like a movie, from the pacing and you just not wanting to stop, and it's all a bit dramatic. Sometimes, even though I really love reading, it can be hard to struggle through those pages when you're tired or anything, but this feels like you're not actually doing anything at all. That sounds like it would be a bad thing, but this actually just feels like you're watching a movie. I can see everything in my head very clearly. Another thing is that this is very heartfelt. I feel like both books I read by Jessie Sutanto are just very positive and heartwarming. You just feel so good after having read it. And the plot of this is that Vera Wong, who lives above her tea shop alone, comes down one day and finds a dead man lying there. And not only does she prepare the crime scene for the police, she also takes a USB stick he has in his hands, thus obviously trying to make her own investigations and blocking the investigation of the police. And then she slowly gets to know the suspects of the case, and she loves all of them. They really bond and form relationships, and it turns out that the dead guy named Marshall was actually a terrible person, and I think that's a prerequisite for this thing to work. If Marshall had been a good person, I don't think it would have come across as well. They all become friends and kind of grow as people after Marshall is dead, because he influenced all of their lives in a very negative way. And that's all I'm gonna say about the plot. The plot twist in the end is also very believable, because I like me a good plot twist, but I don't like when it's like, you know, the Pretty Little Liars plot twist. Oh, it was her stepsister all along. That's just stupid to me. But this plot twist made a lot of sense, and this book feels like it takes the reader seriously. I love this one. If you take one recommendation from this month, I think it must be this one. These are all the books I've read in July, or at least the ones I haven't talked about already. Yeah, let me know down in the comments if you have read any of them. And with that, I'm going to see you next time.